On the night of the 13th of June, in a stadium in New Jersey that has been renamed for the duration of this tournament, Brazil played Morocco in one of the most anticipated group stage fixtures of the entire World Cup. Vinícius Jr scored. But it wasn't the goal that people were still talking about the next morning. At halftime, a reporter approached Vinícius Jr for what is now a mandatory part of World Cup broadcasting, the halftime tunnel interview. Every major tournament now includes these. Players, mid-match, pulled aside for 30 seconds to give broadcasters something to fill the gap before the second half. Vinícius declined. The reporter told him on camera that FIFA would fine him for refusing. His reply was 4 words, "We will pay it," and then he walked back down the tunnel. That moment, 4 words, captured on a beIN Sports camera, no interview given, has become one of the defining images of this World Cup's opening days. Not because of what it says about Vinícius Jr specifically, but because of what it represents about a tension that has been building inside football for years, and that this tournament has brought into sharper focus than almost anything else has managed. So let's actually unpack this properly. What happened? Why it happened, and what it tells us about where the relationship between players, broadcasters, and FIFA currently stands, on the very stage where that relationship is under more strain than it has ever been. First, the basic facts. According to reporting that emerged within hours of the match, a Nigerian football journalist working the tournament reported that Vinícius could now face disciplinary actions specifically for refusing the mandatory halftime interview. The mandatory nature of these interviews is written into FIFA's media regulations for this tournament, part of the broadcasting agreements that fund a significant portion of the $13 billion in commercial revenue this World Cup is expected to generate. Players are contractually expected, through their federations, to make themselves available. Vinícius's response, "We will pay it," wasn't framed as a protest in the moment. It was almost matter-of-fact, as if the fine itself was simply a cost he was prepared to absorb in exchange for not having to stand in a tunnel mid-match, with his heart rate still elevated for 45 minutes of competitive football, answering questions for a broadcast feed. And here's where the story gets more interesting, because this wasn't an isolated flashpoint involving one player having a frustrating evening. It sits inside a pattern that has been building around Vinícius specifically, and around this tournament more broadly, for months. Go back to April. Real Madrid were playing Benfica in the Champions League. During that match, Vinícius accused Benfica's Gianluca Prestiani of directing abusive language at him, while covering his mouth with his hand, making it nearly impossible for officials, cameras, or anyone watching to verify exactly what had been said. The referee activated the anti-racism protocol. The match was stopped for around 10 minutes. The incident became a significant talking point across European football, with teammates backing Vinícius's account and governing bodies acknowledging openly how difficult it is to enforce conduct rules when there's no clear visual or audio evidence of what was actually said. FIFA's response to that incident was to change the laws of the game. At a meeting of the International Football Association Board in Vancouver, a new rule was approved, one that's already being called informally the Vinícius Jr law. Under the new guidance, if a player covers their mouth while speaking to an opponent or official during a heated exchange, the referee now has the authority to issue a straight red card. Infantino explained the logic himself. "If you don't have something to hide," he said, "you don't hide your mouth when you say something. There must be a presumption that he said something he shouldn't have." That's a significant rule change. It was implemented specifically for this tournament, and it exists because of an incident involving the same player who, a few weeks later, told a reporter he'd rather pay a fine than speak into a microphone. There's also been a smaller, quieter friction point worth mentioning because it adds texture to the picture. During a separate press conference earlier in the tournament, Vinícius, a native Portuguese speaker who is more comfortable answering in Spanish than in English, asked whether a question could be put to him in Spanish. He was told no. Remote interpretation for that particular press conference was only available in English, Japanese, and Dutch. A similar moment happened with Netherlands midfielder Frank de Jong, who was told a Spanish-language question would need to be translated into one of those 3 approved languages before it could be put to him.
None of this on its own is a scandal.
Translation logistics at a 48-team tournament across 3 countries are genuinely complicated, and FIFA can't realistically provide live interpretation in every language for every press conference. But put it all together, the mandatory interviews, the language restrictions, the new mouth-covering rule, and now a player saying on camera that he'd rather absorb a fine than participate in the broadcast process, and you start to see the outline of something bigger than any single incident. It's worth pausing here and asking what the halftime interview actually is and why it exists at all. 20 years ago, this format barely existed. Players gave interviews after matches, in mixed zones, once they'd showered and had time to process what had happened. The halftime interview is a newer invention, a direct product of the way modern broadcast deals are structured. Halftime is no longer just 15 minutes for players to recover, for managers to make tactical adjustments, and for the crowd to get a drink. It has become broadcast real estate, a window that rights holders have paid enormous sums to fill, and which they fill, in part, with player access. This World Cup has gone further than any previous tournament in formalizing that access, and it sits alongside another change introduced for this tournament that has generated its own wave of criticism in the days since the opening match: the mandatory hydration breaks. Every match at this World Cup now includes a compulsory 3-minute stoppage roughly midway through each half, regardless of conditions. FIFA's stated justification is player welfare, specifically the genuinely serious heat that's expected across multiple host cities in June and July, where pitch-level temperatures in some venues could reach levels that pose real risks to players' health during 90 minutes of high-intensity competition. On that basis alone, the policy has a legitimate foundation. Player safety in extreme heat is not something to dismiss. But what's drawn criticism, including at least one prominent sports columnist in a piece published in the days after the opening match, is what those breaks actually do in practice. They create 4 additional, guaranteed advertising windows per match, 2 per half, beyond the conventional halftime interval. At a tournament where Infantino has repeatedly highlighted that revenues are set to exceed £10 billion for the first time in World Cup history, a milestone he has framed as cause for celebration, critics have asked a fairly direct question: is more revenue actually necessary? And if player welfare is genuinely the primary motivation, why does the policy so neatly double as a 4 times per match commercial opportunity that broadcasters get to monetize? We saw exactly this dynamic play out in the tournament's opening match between Mexico and South Africa. Shortly after Raúl Jiménez scored Mexico's second goal in the 67th minute, a deeply emotional moment, his first ever World Cup goal, breaking a long-standing pattern of disappointing home openers for Mexico, the referee used that exact moment as the trigger for the second hydration break of the match. The U.S. broadcast cut to commercial immediately afterward. Viewers who wanted to sit with that goal, to watch the celebration unfold, to hear the crowd, found themselves looking at adverts instead. Is that a conspiracy? No. The hydration break rules apply at a designated point in the match regardless of what's happening on the pitch, and a goal happening to fall right before that point is, most likely, simply timing. But the criticism isn't really about that one moment. It's about what the moment revealed: that a welfare policy and a commercial policy can occupy exactly the same 3 minutes, and that when they do, it becomes very hard to separate which one is actually driving the decision.
Now, here's where I think the Vinícius moment and the hydration break criticism connect into something larger, because both stories, in their own way, are about the same underlying tension: the growing distance between football as a contest, 90 minutes, 2 teams, a result, and football as a broadcast product, with its own internal logic, its own commercial windows, its own contractual obligations that exist independently of what's actually happening in the game. For decades, those two things mostly coexisted without much friction. Adverts happened at halftime. Players gave interviews after the final whistle, once the match was over and the result was settled. The structure of the broadcast followed the structure of the match. What's changed, gradually, then suddenly, and very visibly at this tournament, is that the broadcast has started to shape the match itself. Stoppages built into the game specifically to create advertising windows, mandatory mid-match interviews that pull players still inside the contest into the broadcast apparatus before the contest is even finished. And the players, who are, after all, the ones actually competing, the ones whose bodies are absorbing 90 minutes of elite physical effort in heat that this tournament's own organizers have acknowledged is a genuine safety concern, are increasingly being asked to also serve as content, available on demand mid-match, whether they feel like it or not. Vinícius's response to that in the tunnel on the 13th of June was simple. He said he'd pay the fine. He didn't make a speech about it. He didn't frame it as a statement. He just declined, accepted the consequence, and walked away. But the fact that his 4 words have been replayed, discussed, and debated across football media for 2 days now tells you that a lot of people, players, fans, commentators, recognized something in that moment. Not arrogance, not a star throwing his weight around, something closer to a very small, very specific act of someone deciding where the line is for them personally in a system that has been quietly moving that line for years without ever formally asking anyone if they agreed to it. Brazil's tournament continues. They're one of the genuine favorites to lift the trophy in New Jersey on the 19th of July, and Vinícius, whatever happens with any fine, will be central to that effort. The football itself, as always, will likely end up being the thing people remember most. A goal, a performance, a run to the final, or an exit before it. That's what World Cups are fundamentally about. But this tournament has also, in its first few days, surfaced a conversation that goes beyond any single match, about hydration breaks that double as ad breaks, about mandatory interviews that players are increasingly choosing to skip, fine or no fine, about a sport whose commercial machinery has grown so large and so embedded into the structure of the game itself that the players competing inside it are starting, in small but visible ways, to push back. Whether that pushback changes anything, whether FIFA reconsiders any of these policies for future tournaments, or whether this becomes simply one more story that gets discussed for a few days and then fades as the football takes over, is genuinely an open question. FIFA has not commented publicly on the Vinícius situation as of the time of writing. But for now, the image stands. A reporter, a microphone, a warning about a fine, and 4 words back. We will pay it. What do you make of it? Do you think players should be required to do interviews mid-match, or is that a step too far into the broadcast side of the game? And what did you think of the hydration break debate after the opening match? Let us know in the comments. This is exactly the kind of conversation worth having as this tournament unfolds. If you want to keep following it with us, subscribe. There's clearly a lot more to come. See you in the next one.